Welcome back, everybody, to our afternoon public session. The next session will be looking at some of the feedback that we've received on the GRI standards. So anybody can email in feedback. Lara will tell us where that goes in a moment and tell us about the feedback. Thank you, Lara.
Thank you, Carol. Indeed. So, well, as you know, the GSSB conducts regular consultations with stakeholders. We had the consultation on the GSSB work program earlier this year, and we also had specific consultations on draft standards that we put out. But in addition to that, there's always a permanent channel for anybody, any user, any stakeholder, to send feedback to the GSSB about the GRI standards. And what we're presenting to you today in item 3 is an overview of all of this feedback that has come in outside of those regular consultation moments of the GSSB. So we will walk you through the feedback. It's 6 different sets of feedback, and the Standards Division has put together a recommendation for how to address the feedback, and we would be welcoming suggestions and recommendations from the GSSB as well. Also important to note that what we are presenting to you is direct feedback we have received. We also receive many technical inquiries on an ongoing basis, so questions on how to apply the standards in a particular situation, which in itself it is also feedback about the application of the GRI standards. So in the near term, we would be looking to analyze those questions as well, to identify the main issues that come out of those questions and bring that to your consideration as well. So we will have a look first at the first 3 sets of feedback. We will pause for questions and comments from the GSSB, and then we will look at the next 3. The first 3 sets of feedback relate to specific disclosures that we have in the universal and in the topic standards. The first feedback relates to the gender breakdowns that we have in Disclosure 2.7 on employees in GRI 2, the general disclosures. And in this disclosure, we have a number of data points on employees where we require a breakdown by gender. And in that disclosure, we also have a table, which is an example for how companies may report the gender breakdown. And in that table, we suggest 4 gender categories: male, female, other, which is to be defined by the employees themselves, and not disclosed. And as you saw in the feedback, one of our users pointed out that the categories of male and female are not gender categories, but sex categories. And they are suggesting that that be changed to men and women. So I think from the standard side, I think one important clarification to make is that the standards do not define gender. There's no definition that we provide for the term gender, and we do not prescribe how to report the gender breakdowns. This is really up to each individual company to decide how to report the gender breakdowns. And Table 1 was just meant as an example or a suggestion for how that could be done, but companies are free to choose whatever other categorization they deem appropriate. So I think with that in mind, we think that we can provide clarity to this question through the use of web FAQ. We don't think it's necessary at this point to make any changes or corrections to GRI 2. It can be easily clarified through a web FAQ. But we, of course, have a project ongoing at the moment to look at all of the labor-related topic standards where gender breakdowns also feature and are also likely to feature going forward. So we would also recommend to share this feedback with that project team and the experts in that project to give us further advice on how to address this issue going forward in the standards. The next feedback relates to the age breakdowns we have in Disclosure 405.1, diversity and equal opportunity. This disclosure is asking for the number of employees and governance body members with a breakdown by age groups. And we require 3 different age groups, under 30 years of age, 30 to 50, and over 50. And as you read in the feedback, there's one user who is suggesting a different categorization of age groups. Even though there isn't really an internationally agreed definition, they are suggesting that there's potentially a better categorization where age groups could be split into 4 different groups: under 24, from 24 to 35, 36 to 50, and over 50. Unlike the previous case, the age breakdowns here are actually a requirement. So this is part of the requirements of this disclosure. But similarly to the previous feedback, this is one of the standards that is currently in the scope to be reviewed by the Labour Project. So our recommendation would be, again, to share this feedback with that team for them to consider in the revision of GRI 405. And the next feedback relates to 2 disclosures on energy and emissions intensity, which we have in GRI 302 and GRI 305, respectively. These disclosures ask for the energy and emissions intensity of the company, and those disclosures leave it up to the company to define the most appropriate denominator, as we were previously discussing. And the guidance suggests different denominators that companies can use, for example, revenue, number of employees, or units of product. And as you saw from the feedback, one of the users is flagging that leaving this up to the company and using specific denominators could potentially lead to misrepresentation of the data. And they are suggesting that GRI should be requiring revenue as the denominator for those metrics. Similar to the previous feedbacks, we have the benefit of having an ongoing project at the moment looking at these 2 disclosures. So again, we recommend leaving this question to the experts to give us their advice on how to address this going forward. So I will pause here for now and see if there's any questions or feedback from the GSSB.
Peter.
Obviously, there's more work for the Labour Technical Committee, but what's new? But on the energy and emissions intensity, this goes to the issue which was discussed in the ex-BRL session about comparability of data and perhaps narrowing the number of choice of denominator. Whichever one you choose, it's subject to problems. And you could say the revenue is one that every company has, but I know there are certain types of companies like commodity traders and stockbrokers, I suppose, supermarket chains that do enormous amounts of buying and selling of goods. And so their revenues are very large, but their profit margin is often quite low relative to their revenues. And I imagine that their emissions would be low relative to their revenues or their turnover. And that's actually not the most useful metric for them because they're doing so much buying and selling of products. Whilst I can see the merit of revenue as perhaps the key denominator, I can also see that there will be certain sectors or industries where it doesn't work so well.
Thanks. Jeff Robertson here. On that topic of energy and emissions intensity, Peter's point is well taken. And in my own personal experience, I've consulted sometimes for the same company for like 10 years. And if you use revenue as your only denominator, then the effect of inflation actually starts to crop up, where it looks like you've gone down 20% in your energy intensity, but really that was 95% of that was just inflation. So I would caution against using only revenue as the sole denominator, unless you're, accounting for inflationary changes over time.
Galia?
Actually, in CDP, we are asked for three denominator: revenue, number of employees, and unit of production. So it is much better to leave this flexibility than to keep only. And I would reflect what you said, Jeff. If you operate in emerging markets, of course, and you report in euros or in dollars, of course, the trend of your revenue, because we always look at the trend of the emissions and energy and the revenue, the trend of the revenue is worsening your emissions result because of the emerging currencies.
Can we say, I can see a couple of other people want to presumably say similar things. Can we not pass this on to the standard project for climate change then? Because I think we're all agreed that it doesn't make much sense to just use revenue. Anybody objecting?
No, I have one more point to make
Okay.
on the revenue.
Right.
So what Jeff was telling, the inflation, I think PPP is one measure. I think we can look at purchase power parity, which in India, the BRSR reporting is requesting people to report on intensity on PPP. So that is basically to avoid any inflation or country's economical situation coming into the intensity level. So that's another recommendation which standard division can consider.
Carol, Chulendra. So, Carol, there's a bit of caution there because there are groups of companies or diversified conglomerates that actually use standards, and they are the reporting entities. So, the only possible consolidation methodology for them would then become revenue. Of course, they do report on their sectoral emissions and the sectoral intensities, but when it comes to making the report for the group or the holding company or the group, there isn't any other better metric than revenue. So we have to be careful in terms of giving them the flexibility.
Okay, so was this saying we only use revenue?
No. We keep the flexibility of it.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about the feedback that we got. Margarita, do you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you, Carol. No, I just wanted to add that we happened to discuss this with the Technical Committee for Climate even before receiving this feedback, and the decision of the Technical Committee was to allow flexibility for many reasons that was also mentioned now. So I just wanted to add this.
Excellent, thank you. We can forget that one then. Thank you.
Something just to add that's on a slightly different topic, but as an investor, our preference is to give us the absolute, so then we can calculate it any way we want. That gives us the most flexibility, so we can aggregate it at the state level and aggregate it, at the sector.
That's helpful to know. Thank you.
I think, just Sebastian, on this, I think that is a basic principle that we continue to handle across everything we do. We don't want to camouflage the absolutes through ratios or whatever. Sometimes there are established ratios and sometimes there are established ways of going about it. We also have to acknowledge that emission intensity is something that, and energy intensity is something that is in all kinds of methodologies, right, in different ways, but to choose the winner here, that cannot be our role. And there are also so many unintended consequences. But we have to make sure that the absolute values are available.
Let investors make sense of the actual data, the impacts.
If I may, just going to feedback item number 1. You mentioned, I think, Laura, that we don't have a definition for gender or sex in the current set of standards. Obviously, it's a bit of a mire right now, topic-wise, so that makes me think, can we lean on definitions from ILO or some human rights group or an external party in the FAQ, just to shirk that responsibility a little bit, if I may be blunt?
I think that would be something we would need to work together with the Labor Technical Committee. I don't know that we as the Standards Division would be able to identify that instrument or reference by ourselves, but I don't know if, Peter, you have any initial thoughts on that?
I do think it needs to end up with the Labor Technical Committee, though I don't have any particular insight now as to the most appropriate source for a definition. As Jeff says, it's a bit of a quagmire right now. But I do recognise the need for clarity of terminology and definitions.
Thank you.
Do you have more?
Good, thank you. And then the next three sets of feedback are more of general nature. They don't relate to any specific disclosure in the standards. The next one is actually a letter that has been submitted on behalf of a group of Ukrainian sustainable development and ESG experts who are asking the GSSB to introduce an obligation in the standards for companies to report on any direct or indirect forms of cooperation with Russia or other anti-democratic regimes. And in the letter, you can see the more detailed rationale and arguments that they have put forward to the GSSB. In the written response we have provided in the paper, we have pointed to the existing GRI standards and other GRI resources that already enable companies to report on this topic, particularly the sector standards, for which we don't have many of those developed, but out of the 4 standards that are either published or very close to finalizing, 3 out of those 4 standards include the conflict topic as a likely material topic, and they provide guidance to reporters on how to report on that particular issue. However, we know that this is an area where more could be done, and in fact, the GSSB had already identified the issue of international humanitarian law in the GSSB work program as an area to do more research and potentially develop practical guidance for reporters. So what we would suggest is that in developing that, we take a broader scope, looking at situations of conflict more general, to provide this very much needed guidance for companies. The next feedback includes a number of points, and I think that the most critical points are about the GRI sector standards classification and the way in which we go about prioritizing sector standards. And the feedback or points being raised is that the sector classification we have at the moment is rigid in the sense of the number of sectors we cover, because we may identify at a later stage that there's actually more than 40 sectors that we need to address. And the other feedback made was that we should be prioritizing sector standards based on those that are most important for the environment. So to respond to the first feedback, I think this is something that we had already anticipated when we started to work on sector again. And it's good to remind ourselves that the list of sectors is not closed. It can evolve over time as the landscape and different priorities at sector level evolve. So this is something where the GSSB has the flexibility to either add sectors to the list, change the prioritization, or look at different groupings or subgroupings of sectors, as we have already been doing over the last few years. And when it comes to the prioritization, also good to know that in principle, the GRI standards do not have a hierarchy of the different dimensions of sustainable development. So we look equally at the 3 different dimensions: economy, environment, and people. And that's also the principle that has been applied in the development of the sector standards. And based on the 4 sectors we have made progress on already, we know that in the dimension of impacts on people, there are significant differences across sector. And I think that that would be important to maintain going forward. So there's no recommendation here for any changes, but just to remind of the approach that we have taken and the principles that we are using to develop sector standards. Bastian, do you want to add anything? Good, and the last one also contains a number of different points. One point is about the need to deepen integration with other standards and frameworks, and the ESRS is highlighted as an important framework to ensure alignment with. And the other point is about the need to introduce benchmarking in the GRI standards. And the example of carbon intensity is given in the feedback, suggesting that GRI should be introducing benchmarks for reporting carbon intensity as one of the examples. With regards to interoperability and integration with other frameworks, this has been discussed at length at this meeting. GRI is investing significantly in alignment and interoperability, particularly with the ESRS, and we will be bringing to the market soon a number of resources to support companies in this area. And when it comes to benchmarking, here it's important to note what we say in the GRI standards currently, which is that the standards do not set any allocations, thresholds, goals and targets, or benchmarks for good or bad performance. And the idea here being that the GRI standards enable others to compare companies against certain benchmarks, but the standards themselves do not set benchmarks as such. What you see, though, in some areas, and one example now is climate change, is that when there is international consensus on certain thresholds and allocations, we do embed those in the GRI standards. So with climate, you've already seen that there's a greater emphasis on the need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. So where international consensus exists on particular thresholds and allocations, those are embedded in the standards, but not specific thresholds or benchmarks at the level of individual disclosures. So I leave it here and welcome any comments or questions from GSSB.
Any comments, questions, Shalendra?
Laura, just on benchmarks and talking about it, yes, I understand we can't do specific benchmarks, but what about, say, zero waste to landfill type of benchmarks, which is kind of in the international arena, but of course takes time to adhere, net zero, for example. Are those possible benchmarks that we can allude to in the standards?
I think these are things that can be considered within the context of a project and what that makes sense in that particular subject area and the feedback from the experts. So that's something that we sort of look at the issue level rather than as across the board for the GRI standards as a whole.
Can I ask on the first point there, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to what extent would that type of issue be captured by our requirements on human rights?
Yes, they would be indeed. So with the update to the universal standards in 2021, we embedded the concept of due diligence and included requirements to report on due diligence, not only human rights due diligence, but due diligence across all of the impacts that a company has in line with the key authoritative instruments of the UN and the OECD. So at a general and generic level, that type of reporting is already embedded in the GRI standards, but we do not have specific guidance on what due diligence means in that particular context that is being suggested here. We do provide some guidance at the sector level for the sectors that we have worked on, but there are particular elements in this feedback that could be potentially be elaborated through guidance or standards in the future. But on the basic level, we do provide the core of reporting.
Thank you very much. I see no further questions. So we'll move on to the next topic on the project schedule for 2024.
Yes, thank you, Carol. The idea behind this session is to inventorize what we're committed to already in terms of running projects and what we anticipate at this stage to be a substantive project for 24. As you know, with the work program that always spans 3 years in total, we issue on a yearly basis a project schedule to give visibility and predictability to the market in terms of the work that we're embarking on. We thought it is a good idea to remind all of us about the ongoing projects and also the things that we have been discussing in terms of substantive items that we know about as a preparation for a discussion in November and potentially even still December meeting to agree the project schedule for next year. What I should say at the outset is that if you were to present what we have on the slides now to the standards division team, they would come up with probably 100 additional deliverables for next year that are somewhat either camouflaged under a top level heading or just about not substantive enough to be listed here, but are substantive in nature in the sense that there are very many hours, weeks going into them as well, right? So we're not trying to be complete here with a catalog. We're trying to frame up those items where we see multiple people collaborating within the standards division, significant portfolios of work. And again, partially things that are underway and partially things that we anticipate need to be done in 24. So I will start walking us quickly through the sector-related projects and reflecting on that. Harold will take over then walking us through the topic standards projects, and then we'll review a list of additional deliverables for 24. There's no decision here to be taken. We of course welcome your feedback at this point in time. Also, maybe you see things that we've omitted here that should be highlighted. But the idea being that we go back also based on the discussions we had at the meeting, reflect on this in terms of capacity. There is also a planning and budget process underway. A request to the supervisory board needs to be submitted by end of November in terms of resourcing for next year and budget for next year. And then we will have to describe what's feasible for 24. So on the sector standard side, we are actually going to wrap up the sector standard project for mining with the launch in the first quarter of 24, and actually the approval still this calendar year. So we're concluding a very substantive project in the sector program. I think we have visibility of the final milestone, and the team is very positive about getting us there by the end of the year. There will be still a substantive commitment into the next year in terms of facilitating the rollout, also making sure that is connected into how the industry looks at these type of developments, and we're promoting it also adequately through our educational offering and so on. So there are still colleagues that are now involved in the project. They will also continue to be involved in the project. Importantly also in relation to translations and the commitments that we have to make any of our standards available in 10 languages currently, potentially more going forward. We've just started the work on the financial services with 3 technical committees underway in parallel. This will take us through the whole next year, but we hope to be able to by the end of next year, go for public exposure with these contents. I think all of you have reviewed the project proposal. We've discussed it at length. This is a very, very involved sector discussion. Not to say that the others weren't, but this one has our particular focus. So this is really just projecting out at this point in time where we want to be. We've allotted a significant number of resources in terms of colleagues that are on the project. We've invested a lot in the preparation but it is the most substantive project to date in the sector program. So we will have 3 sector standards in development, even with the mining one closing by the end of the year with the approval. Then when it comes to next steps, we already had the textiles and apparel project approved, also a call for working group members, and actually confirmed with you also in the public domain a working group. Unfortunately, due to a colleague leaving the organization, we had to put the project on hold, but we will want to revive that project as soon as possible. Also because we have made a commitment to working group members, experts, to get started on this in the first quarter of next year. So this is really not something that we can put on hold for much longer. And we're currently looking at resourcing for that project. And there is basically a firm commitment to get started on this as soon as possible. When you look at the work program that is in the public domain, we have listed a sector standards project for food and beverages, sector standards project for utilities, and a sector standards project for renewable energy. As we are currently composed with the sector program capacity team, we're not able to start any of those projects at this point in time. We have a backlog in replacing colleagues that have left the organization, but most importantly, we also still need to hire the leadership for this function in the standards division. And there, we haven't been successful so far. So there will be another attempt in the coming weeks to close out this important hire, but realistically, that will only become, the new colleague can only join in 24. So what I'm saying right now is that it is more likely than not that starting date of another sector standard project, or several of those starting that you see on the list here, that definitely gets pushed out to the second half of 24 at this point in time. We are operating with the sector program in an interesting space. I think we flagged up in the work program that we would like to look at joint standard setting with the key players. I think we have a partial answer from the ISSB, who will be focusing on the internationalization of the SASB standards for now, and they don't plan to revisit the SASB standards in substance at this point in time. So there's nothing to connect to really on that front, other than considering what has been stood up by the colleagues of SASB and is now going to be taken into the mix of the ISSB standards. That is something we've been doing in all sector standards. We've always looked at the work that has been originated by SASB. It is slightly different on the EU front. They have started to work on sector standards already, while the overall timeline has been pushed out for this. We anticipate that there will be work ongoing at AFRAC on sector standards, and we will aim to reconnect back to this. There is a pending discussion with the European regulator on what the priorities are when it comes to sectors, and that might or not lead to changes in our priorities as well, because if there is an opportunity to align the standard setting agenda, we believe it would be a positive signal if the EU with AFRAC and GRI, the GSSB, developing standards for sectors in parallel or jointly, right? But it's too soon to tell. It is certainly something that we're engaging in detailed discussions on in the coming weeks, and we hope to close out these discussions once also the regulatory schedule has been fully approved in the EU. Then a last piece around the sector program is that we are developing ideas around sector-focused materials that are not standards probably at this stage. They are more in the space of guidance. We've identified a demand and a need in the market around these lists of likely material topics. as an input to materiality processes, also importantly as an anchor point to flag up that there is a much wider set of sustainability topics that needs to be considered by companies. So there is a concept under development in the standards division that we would like to present to you still this year. But we're not far enough in the discussions that it is presentable at this point in time. I just wanted to flag that up because what we might want to do is to expedite some of the discussions around likely material topics for a range of sectors. So to have guidance available for a number of high impact sectors sooner than we could have it available through a fully fledged due process based sector standard project. This is all I can say about it now. We were still dwelling on all kinds of decisions in relation to that concept. But once we have it, we will surface it with you and discuss it. And the aim is to do that still this quarter. I think I pause here, ask whether there are any questions about the sector program.
Thanks, Bastian. Jeff Robertson here. One thing I was just curious about. So you note the dependency within the sector standard program for the leadership, and that it was an individual role who will lead that full function, right? But in practical terms, the people who lead the programs and manage the projects are at kind of manager level, right? So are the managers in place and the dependencies, you're just waiting for the leader, or is it you're gonna have to hire the leader first and then the managers? I'm just concerned about the...
Yeah, no, it's actually, it's two things. It is the leadership, but it is also then adding additional capacity to the team. Right now, I'm responsible for the team. I have assumed these line management responsibilities, but I'm not doing justice to that function, and extending it now, bringing more people on is not the responsible way forward. So we want to fill this leadership position first. Yeah.
So could be a pretty substantial delay then, right?
Potentially. So what I hope is that we have a signal for you at the next meeting already. That's what we're working towards.
Good to hear. Excellent. I understand there's been it's been very challenging for EFRAG and the European Union getting standards developed, and standards are often in those circumstances a compromise situation. But as we go forward with the sector standards, I'm wondering what the likelihood is of a renewed effort for alignment with our global standards and how we can help facilitate that.
Well, I think this is exactly the discussion that is taking place now with EFRAG, and that we need to explore more whether we can co-locate interests in that area. That's the priorities that we spell out publicly and where we focus our sector efforts, and as B, also the programmatic work in terms of working towards at least a similar output, because there are some, when you look at the system of the ESRS and how they are set up, there are some judgments and decisions already in how they're currently set up that will lead to slightly different sector standards. They connect differently into their structure. They also have a different level of reliance on sector-specific disclosure than we have, but that doesn't say that large parts of the background research and also the discussions with experts could actually be entertained together. But it's too soon to tell, and I think there is also, as recently as in the last days, there's new information coming out in to what extent sector standards are a priority for the regulator at this point in time. So that has certainly changed the timeline for EFRAG.
Okay, thank you. I think we must try hard where we can to influence some of these new developments so that they are aligned around the world.
Yeah.
And that way we get closer to global consistency and comparability, which can be done through the GRI standards.
Thank you, Carol. Harold here. Yeah, so basically for the topic standards, we had the task back in 2023 where the GSSB said and decided that we need to revise all the topic standards within the next 3 years. So basically by the end of 2025, we want to make sure that all the topic standards, existing topic standards, are either under revision or being revised. So as a topics team, we made sure to find the resources, so we grew. Made sure we had all the systems and processes in place to speed up according to your process protocol. And yeah, basically we now have, of the 30 standards, basically there are about 20 under revision. You can imagine the team is under, well, it's a daily business of keep this going with all the multi-stakeholder processes and with the technical committees and working groups ongoing. During these days and also last GSB meeting, you got already some overview of the running projects. So very short update. Biodiversity, we're closing it down and to be able to publish it early next year. Doing it in such a way that it is the global consensus, that it is aligned with all the international relevant initiatives, work together with IFRS ISSB, with AFRAC, with TNFD, which you saw yesterday, and we continue doing that. So but for this year, this is really the final go of the team and also the technical committee. Very exciting. So let's go to the next. Bastian, please. Yes, thank you. For climate change, well, we heard today, due to the needs and also the global needs on transparency, global consensus, and looking at the content we had, which was basically from 2013, we had, as you have seen today, we made heavy changes, but we think it's needed, and we already heard you all saying this is very comprehensive and a very nice and good disclosure, set of disclosures. So all the efforts this year are based on bringing it to the exposure period, bringing to the public commenting period. It looks now that we are able to getting the final peer reviews and the final comments also from GSSB in there, and to be able to bring it to the GSB for your formal approval before the end of the year, and then we can go to roll out our public inquiry period with events, with cooperation with others, especially close cooperation with the WRI greenhouse gas protocol, also testing some of their new insights, as Margarita said. So exciting to do. So next one, please. Labor, also there. You saw yesterday where we are. It is the biggest project ongoing. Sometimes I say program because there is at least 10 standards involved and also some new things we have to include there. It's a little bit delay due to the complexity, but basically we grew the team. As you heard from Izzy yesterday, we chosen a different concept within the the due process protocol, also with the advisory committee, with an advisory group underneath it. It works, in our opinion, very well. We heard also Peter alluding to that from GSSB perspective. And as it looks now, we're still able to bring the first set of 4 documents to the public inquiry by the end, but I would say early Q2. Let's go to the next. The next, Bastian, is the economic impacts project. You also got a presentation there. We're in the middle now of the recruitment of the working group. We got a lot of input. Of course, we have to make sure the right constituencies, the right balance is there. And we see this as also a complex project, simply because we have to discuss a lot of fundamental things there. How to get the economic impacts from a sustainable development perspective really, in a well and a very good requirement very good requirement. I would say system from our side. It's three sessions. First working group, the group we are creating now will work on both the first and the second set of standards, and then a third group will go. We will bring probably some extra nominations to you for the third group because we need some extra expertise there. But that's 2025 probably. So this is the economic ones also ongoing, and then finally you haven't seen this. You only saw it in the work program, pollution, basically of the, I would say, the triangle of biodiversity, nature, climate change, and pollution. This is everybody knows this is the big thing to have the information on, especially from corporates and from organizations to be reporting upon. On the one hand, we have a lot of these standards which are related to aspects, pollution-related aspects. We have our waste standard, we have our non-greenhouse gas emission disclosures, which will fall out of the revision with the climate now. We have the effluent, we have the water, wastewater, and basically we touch upon a lot of them, but we want to bring it, we have to revise it, we want to bring it probably in a different, more easy to be reported set of disclosures. We're heavily debating it now internally just to see how we can come up with the best proposal, draft proposal in December. That's where this one is. And the next. This is about what it looks like for 2024. So looking ahead, labor continues to go with the first set of exposure, but then the second set starts to draft. As you can see here, climate change, of course, we enter public exposure and we have to deal with all the comments, observations and bring it, but we intend to bring it to publication before the end of next year, so 2024. Economic impacts, probably at the end of Q4, we still are aiming to have a first exposure set of 1 or 2 standards. Phase 2 and 3, at this moment we intend to bring the second and the third phase to draft development. I have to say this depends also on resources. You see this list here, is at this moment I don't have all the resources yet for this to be accelerated or even start phase 2 or phase 3 for the impact one. Pollution the same, it's one person working on that. Now that's possible also in the scoping and even in the early stages, but if we are diving into the content development, I need extra resources. I need resources from also expertise from the SEMP team, from Laura, and that's. I think we will manage that, but we will have to see. Basically, pollution starts off after your approval in next year. Next one. In the work program, which is on our website, in which you approved, we also said, well, basically we estimate, we foresee with our outlook, we thought indigenous people and local communities is a lot of comments and feedback that there is more need for revision on that one. Also in relation to climate change, we heard it also in relation to the field of biodiversity and digitalization as a new project, as you remember, and also security practices, which could you could bring it on some others, but these were projected for 2004. At this moment, I think that based on also recruitment, we have to be realistic, and it will be very, very challenging also to start these, because I just said we have almost 20 standards on development, and I expect we need to do some extra guidance on, especially with biodiversity being published. The PCP of climate is not just a normal PCP, it will have a heavy traffic and will ask more of our team to be done, I expect. So we should, at this moment, I don't think these 3 will be rolled out, and if we roll them out, it will be very late in the year, but I expect actually it's better to bring them to 2025. Not saying that they are not needed, of course, everything is needed, but I think that's what I can say for 2024. I didn't put on here some other guidances like we talked about this IHL, International Humanitarian Law. I didn't put them on here because these are not the authoritative standards or documents, but also that kind of work will be elevated. Next one. Shall I do that? Yeah. Next to that we have, as I said, we're talking about guidances, more specific guidance, but as today you heard, we have to work on the bigger project like the XBRL taxonomy. Bigger project, maybe even 2 documents on the guidance to identify the impacts, risks and opportunities, or the risks and opportunities which arise from impacts. You heard about our alignment procedure or our project, a pilot project, to make sure that in the future we can always align our topics with the sector standards. Which was not in our program, so not as in the way we thought it was, so we think it will take considerably resources. Translation of GRI standards, the interoperability, linkage documents, mapping documents. Yeah, on the one hand, we're very happy with the requests we get because it seems that users are very happy with it and that they really serve a purpose. This also means that this will take more resources than we expected. It's more successful, you could say. So Laura's team is happy on the one hand. On the other hand, it's really a challenge. Technical inquiries, feedback, of course, support of our other teams, also in education. So we see that the training needs grow. Also, if we have more projects ongoing, more topic standards and sector standards being published, more training, more services is needed. So more resources are needed and to help. And we identified earlier in the year the research project on the public sector, so it's also still there. So it doesn't cover everything, but at least these are the main things. I think it's Bastian.
Yeah, I think this list is there, and some of the topics we discussed in quite some depth in the last 2 days, but it is to flag that we will have to reprioritize. And while you see also in my representation for the sector program and Harold's presentation for the topic standards, we want to move as fast as possible, but there is a moment now that we need to do some reality also in terms of what we're learning, and the involvement with an XBRL taxonomy project, the involvement with the linkage documents, the involvement with the discussions that we have with EFRAG and ISB. On average, everything is 2, 3, 4 times as much time commitment than we had planned, and that is not something that is to be controlled through process or anything like that. So we will have to reevaluate these priorities. I think what I would leave as a principle, we have committed projects in the public domain at this point, and we have involved experts, and once we've gone past that point, it is just not practical to put things on hold or go back, so we will have to exercise those, and that will have our priority, and then we will have to sort through these things and say how much of that can be done realistically with existing capacity, and we have to have the institutional conversation about how much more capacity can be made available. And that will enable us to put specification on what we can do in 24. But we will be back with that discussion. I think it was really important for us to see that you had all kinds of commentary on some of these bigger projects like XBRL taxonomy, right, or the discussion we had about linkages and all of that, the guidance. If we attach value to this, if we see them as a priority, something else has to give. That's as simple as it is, even with endless resources. It's not practical to advance everything in parallel. That's an exercise we're going through, and we will report back. We will definitely be able to close that prioritization this year, by the end of the year. So that also, I think that's a very important thing for us collectively, to give visibility to the market, to the stakeholders, what they can expect of us next year, and we will do that in due time.
from my side, I think two things come to mind. If anybody knows of any good people that might be interested in filling any of the vacant positions, please do signal them to the vacancies so that they can apply. And secondly, I mean, this is a long list of things where it is difficult to anticipate how much is going to need to be done, how time-consuming it will be. On top of this list, there is also the ongoing work in interacting with other standard setters and regulators as well. So yes, it is quite a list, and one where it's difficult to predict the actual amount of time involved. So let's hope we fill some of those vacant positions soon. Thank you. Was there any other observations on this from anybody?
Peter here, I just appreciate the amount of work that the Standards Division is doing. Well, I have some appreciation, perhaps not full enough, but I deeply appreciate the workload that's being endured and the amount of work that's being done. Thank you.
Kalia?
Do you need sponsorship for some of these here from the GSSB members?
That is certainly something. So we will also look at formalizing some of these commitments, and then if you take an interest in one of these projects, I think the same rules apply as for the standards project. So we would very much welcome your involvement and guidance also as part of reviews and project team discussions.
Yeah, good question, Galia. Thank you. Well, I think with that, I think we have been through all our agenda items. So thank you all very much for attending. Thanks very much to the standards team, Harold, Margarita, Lara, who are here, and Bastian for his superb leadership through the months. Thank you. Everything is always so efficiently done and provided, and the whole process of developing standards, I think, is excellent. And of course, it has been tried and tested over many years now. So I think we're very good at it here at GRI. Thank you. So I think with that, we'll close the public meeting. Thank you. And